My face card never declines.
Maggie, who told you that?
My face card never declines. Maggie knew who she was from an early age. Even before she fully understood the way people in the village looked at her, she already understood herself. She grew up in a small village where everyone knew everyone's business. The houses were built close together, the roads were dusty, and news traveled faster than the wind. If someone sneezed in the morning, the whole village would know before evening. That was the kind of place Maggie grew up in. But in that same village, there was one thing people talked about more than anything else: beauty. The villagers had very clear ideas of what beauty should look like.
A beautiful girl is expected to be slim, light on her feet, soft-spoken,
Delicate.
Of course.
Maggie was none of those things. From a very young age, Maggie was chubby. As she grew older, she became even bigger. Her cheeks were round, her arms were thick, and when she walked, people noticed her immediately. Unfortunately, not in a good way. Some villagers did not even try to hide their opinions. Look at that girl, one woman would whisper to another. She eats too much, another would reply. Children were even worse. Whenever Maggie walked past groups of children, some of them would start laughing. "Big Maggie," they would shout. Sometimes they would clap their hands and sing silly songs just to mock her. At school, it wasn't much better. Some girls refused to sit beside her.
Her nose is so big, and she just stands there.
Others compared her to girls who were considered prettier. "Look at Amma," one girl once said loudly during break time. "That is how a girl should look." Another one added, "Not like Maggie." The words were not whispered. They were loud enough for Maggie to hear. But something about Maggie confused people, because she never reacted the way they expected. She didn't cry. She didn't beg them to stop. She didn't hide in corners. Instead, Maggie simply shrugged and continued with her life. It puzzled the villagers. One afternoon, two women sat under a mango tree watching Maggie walk past with a small basket on her head. One of them shook her head. "That girl doesn't even act like someone people insult every day," she said. The other woman nodded slowly. "It's like she doesn't hear anything." But Maggie heard everything. Every whisper, every laugh, every insult. She simply refused to let it define her. A big reason for that was her mother. Her mother was not a rich woman. She worked hard every day doing small trading in the market just to keep food on their table. But there was one thing she always made sure of. Her daughter would never grow up believing she was less than anyone else. Whenever Maggie came home from school and mentioned the things people said about her, her mother would sit her down and speak calmly.
The world will try to define you, but you must never let them decide who you are.
At first, Maggie did not fully understand those words, but as she grew older, they began to make sense. Slowly, Maggie built something inside herself that no insult could destroy: confidence. By the time Maggie was a teenager, she had developed a small habit that made her best friend laugh. Whenever someone tried to insult her looks, Maggie would simply smile and say something that sounded ridiculous.
My face card never declines.
The first time she said it, her best friend burst into laughter. "Maggie, who told you that?" "I told myself," Maggie replied proudly. "Even when they say your face declines," her friend teased. Maggie flipped her hair dramatically. "My face card," she repeated, "never declines." Her confidence was so natural that sometimes it made people uncomfortable, because deep down, many of the people mocking her were not even confident in themselves. But Maggie was different. She walked with her shoulders straight. She spoke boldly. She laughed loudly. And she refused to shrink herself to make others comfortable. But what many villagers did not know was that Maggie was not only confident, she was also talented. Very talented. Her hands seemed to understand things quickly. If Maggie watched someone do something once or twice, she could almost always figure it out herself afterward. From a young age, Maggie loved using her hands to create things. While other girls spent hours gossiping, Maggie spent her time learning small skills. Sometimes she sat quietly in the compound sewing small pieces of fabric together. Other times, she experimented with her sister's hair, braiding different styles just to see what looked best. She even helped repair torn clothes in the house. If something broke, Maggie was usually the one trying to fix it. Her mother noticed this early. "This girl's hands are special," she once told a neighbor. But Maggie herself had not yet discovered one thing she would fall completely in love with. Something that would change her life, something that would make the same villagers who mocked her one day beg for her attention. And when Maggie eventually found it, the entire village would be forced to see her in a completely different light. When she was around 15, Maggie began learning how to sew from an elderly tailor who lived a few houses away. The woman allowed young girls in the village to sit in her shop and observe while she worked. While most of the girls eventually got bored and wandered away, Maggie stayed. She watched carefully how the fabric was measured, how the scissors moved smoothly through cloth, how the sewing machine hummed as dresses slowly came together. Within months, Maggie was already sewing small pieces for herself. She made small skirts, simple blouses. Even her mother was surprised the first time Maggie brought out a dress she had sewn by herself. "You made this?" her mother asked, turning the dress over in her hands. Maggie nodded proudly. Her mother smiled. "You really do have special hands." But Maggie didn't stop there. Whenever her sister sat in the compound in the evening, Maggie would grab a comb and start trying different styles.
Sit still,
Maggie would say, concentrating. Her sister would roll her eyes but stay seated while Maggie braided carefully. Sometimes it came out messy, sometimes it came out beautiful, but Maggie kept practicing. Before long, even her best friend Mimi began coming around whenever she wanted her hair done.
Maggie, try that style you did yesterday.
Mimi would say excitedly. Maggie would smile and get to work. But out of all the things Maggie learned, there was one skill that captured her heart more than anything else: makeup. The first time Maggie truly noticed makeup was during a wedding in the village. The bride had sat in front of a mirror while a makeup artist carefully worked on her face. Maggie stood at the corner of the room watching quietly. She was fascinated. How a simple face slowly transformed under careful hands. How colors blended together. How confidence seemed to appear as the bride looked at herself in the mirror. From that day, Maggie became obsessed. She started collecting small makeup items whenever she could afford them. A powder here, a lipstick there.
Maggie, I'm giving you this money to keep for me.
Of course, Mimi, I'll guard it with my life.
Sometimes Mimi helped her save money to buy small beauty products from the market. Then Maggie began practicing. Her first victim was her mother. "Mama, sit down," Maggie said one evening while holding a small brush. "For what?" her mother asked suspiciously. "I want to try something." Her mother laughed. "Just don't make me look like a masquerade." Maggie carefully applied powder, lipstick, and a little color to her mother's cheeks. When she finished, she held up a small mirror. Her mother blinked in surprise. "Ah, is this me?" Maggie grinned. Soon, Maggie practiced on her sister too. Then on Mimi. Mimi became Maggie's most loyal supporter. Sometimes the two of them would sit outside under the orange tree practicing different styles. "Maggie, imagine when you become famous," Mimi would tease. Maggie would laugh loudly. "Just wait. Someday people will beg me to touch their face." But unfortunately, the villagers were not impressed. In fact, the more Maggie practiced, the more the mocking increased. Whenever some women saw her carrying her makeup box, they whispered, "Look at her, that ugly girl doing makeup." Another woman said loud enough for Maggie to hear, "Who will allow someone like her touch their face?" A group of girls nearby burst into laughter. Maggie paused for a moment. Then she continued walking as if she had heard nothing. But later that evening, while sitting with Mimi, she repeated the words quietly.
Who will allow someone like me touch their face?
They are jealous.
I know. One day you people will see.
She said it so calmly that Mimi believed her, because Maggie never sounded like someone who doubted herself, even when the whole village laughed, even when people whispered behind her back, even when they judged her by her appearance. Maggie kept practicing every single day, because deep down inside, Maggie believed something that the rest of the village did not yet understand. Talent does not ask for permission to shine.
Princess Igofin's grand birthday celebration was approaching. It was the most talked about event of the year. Every village within the kingdom knew about it. Traders mentioned it in the markets.
The princess's birthday is tomorrow. I know. We have to get her a gift.
Children talked about it while playing in dusty compounds. Even elders sitting under the shade of old trees discussed the preparations happening inside the royal palace. Princess Igovin was loved across the kingdom, not just because she was royalty, but because she carried herself with grace and kindness. The villagers rarely saw her in person because ordinary people did not often have reasons to enter royal grounds. But once a year, during her birthday celebration, the palace gates opened for a grand ceremony. It was one of the few times the people of the kingdom could catch a glimpse of her. They would see her beautiful face, her elegant dresses, her royal presence. And every year, the celebration was bigger than the last. So in the weeks leading up to the event, excitement filled the entire region. Villagers talked about what the princess might wear. Traders prepared special fabrics.
For the princess' birthday, we sing and play.
Musicians practiced their performances. Even Maggie and Mimi discussed it while sitting under the orange tree one evening.
Imagine if we could see the princess up close.
Mimi said dreamily.
One day.
She replied confidently. But Maggie had no idea how soon that day would come, because on the morning of the celebration, something unexpected happened. Very early that morning, inside the palace, panic broke out. The princess's official makeup artist had fallen terribly sick. She had been preparing for weeks to work on the princess's birthday look, but when she woke up that morning, she was too weak to stand. The palace attendants quickly called for doctors, but the diagnosis was clear. She could not work that day, and the celebration was only a few hours away. Without makeup, the princess could not appear before the royal guests. The palace maidens rushed through the corridors in confusion. "What are we going to do?" one maiden asked anxiously. "We need another makeup artist immediately," another replied. Within minutes, royal messengers were sent out across nearby villages. Their instructions were simple: find any talented makeup artist immediately. One of those messengers eventually arrived in Maggie's village. He stood in the center of the village square and made the announcement loudly.
Hear this message from the royal palace. The princess's makeup artist has fallen sick. The palace urgently needs a skilled makeup artist. Anyone who believes they have the talent should report to the palace immediately.
A murmur spread through the crowd. Some villagers shook their heads. "The palace?" one woman whispered. "That place is not for ordinary people." Another added, "Only professionals should go there." Some laughed nervously. "Who from this village can do royal makeup?" Maggie had been standing quietly near the back of the crowd, holding her small makeup box. The moment she heard the announcement, something inside her lit up. Without hesitation, she stepped forward. "I will go." Several heads turned immediately. The villagers stared at her. Then some of them laughed. "You," one man said, "the palace is not a joke." But Maggie ignored them. She turned and walked quickly back to her house. Her mother was sitting outside sorting vegetables when Maggie arrived. "Mama," she said quickly, "the palace needs a makeup artist for the princess today. I'm going." Her mother looked up in shock. "You are going where?" "To the palace." Her mother immediately shook her head. "No." Maggie frowned. "Mama, why?" "The palace is not a place to experiment," she said carefully. "These villagers already bully you enough." Maggie smiled and said, "Mama, maybe my face gets bullied in this village, but today my face card will not decline." Her mother stared at her for a moment. Maggie's confidence had always been difficult to argue with. After a long pause, her mother sighed.
Take your sister with you. Thank you, Mama.
Maggie's face lit up. Within minutes, she packed her makeup tools carefully into her box. Her sister quickly tied her wrapper and followed her out of the compound. Some villagers watched them leave, others whispered, "Let's see how long she lasts there." But Maggie walked with confidence the entire way to the palace. When she finally arrived at the palace gates, the guards were surprised to see her. But after hearing about the announcement, they allowed her inside. Soon, Maggie found herself standing inside one of the royal dressing rooms, and in front of her sat Princess Igovin. The princess looked Maggie up and down carefully. Her eyes narrowed slightly. She leaned closer to her friend and whispered quietly,
Are you sure about this girl?
Her friend studied Maggie for a moment before replying calmly. "You should not judge someone by their appearance," she said softly. The princess sighed. "I know, but this is my birthday celebration. The entire kingdom will be watching." Her friend smiled gently.
Then maybe this is the moment to trust talent instead of appearances.
The princess looked at Maggie again. Maggie stood calmly with her makeup box in her hands. She did not look nervous. She did not look desperate. She simply looked ready. After a moment of silence, the princess spoke.
What is your name? My name is Maggie, Your Highness.
Maggie replied respectfully.
You believe you can do this? Yes, Your Highness. All right, you may try.
Maggie placed her makeup box on the table and opened it carefully. Inside were her brushes, powders, small palettes, and lip colors she had collected over time. She stepped closer to the princess. Years of practice had prepared her for this moment. She began walking slowly. First, she prepared the princess's skin. Then she carefully blended the foundation to match the princess's natural tone. The room was quiet as Maggie walked. Even the attendant watching nearby became curious. Maggie's hands moved with confidence. Minutes passed. Finally, Maggie stepped back. Your Highness, she said softly, you may look now. The princess slowly turned toward the mirror. She stared. She leaned closer to the mirror. Her face looked radiant. Is this really me? The princess whispered in disbelief. Her friend burst into laughter.
I told you not to judge by appearances.
The princess turned to Maggie with amazement.
You are extraordinary.
Soon it was time for the celebration. The palace courtyard filled with royal guests, noble families, and visitors from across the kingdom. When Princess Egovin stepped into the celebration hall, the entire room seemed to pause. She looked stunning. The guests immediately began whispering among themselves.
Look at the princess.
She looks even more beautiful than usual.
Who did her makeup?
The questions spread through the room. Eventually, someone pointed toward Maggie, who was standing quietly near the courtyard. That is the makeup artist. Soon, the requests began. A noble woman approached first.
Can you do mine as well? Of course, I'd be happy to.
Then another royal guest stepped forward. Please, I would like the same look. Then another, and another. Before Maggie realized what was happening, a line had already formed. Princesses from other royal families, important guests, they all wanted Maggie. Maggie walked tirelessly, brush after brush, face after face. Her hands moved quickly but carefully. Hours passed. By afternoon, Maggie's feet ached. Her shoulders were tired. Her fingers felt stiff from holding brushes all day. But when she finally closed her makeup box and counted the money she had earned that day, her eyes widened in disbelief. She had made more money in one day than she had ever seen in her life. Just as Maggie was preparing to leave, one of the palace attendants approached her.
The princess would like to see you. The princess? But I finished for the day.
Maggie followed her down the quiet palace hallway until they reached a beautiful sitting room where Princess Egovin was waiting. The princess smiled the moment she saw her. Maggie, she said warmly, you saved my birthday today. Maggie bowed her head respectfully. It was an honor, Your Highness. The princess laughed softly. From today, you are no longer just a village makeup artist. I want you to be my personal makeup artist. Maggie blinked in surprise. Your personal makeup artist? The princess nodded. Yes, whenever I have royal events or ceremonies, you will be the one to prepare my face. Maggie felt her heart racing. This was something she had only joked about before. Now it was real. But the surprises did not end there. The next morning, Maggie was summoned again, this time to the royal court. The king himself had heard about what happened during the celebration. When Maggie entered the large hall, she felt small standing before the throne, but the king looked at her kindly. So, you are the girl everyone is talking about, he said. Maggie bowed again. Yes, Your Majesty. The king smiled. I hear you turned my daughter into the most beautiful woman in the kingdom yesterday. You have great talent, the king continued, and talent should not be hidden. I am giving you a grant, the king announced. Use it to grow your craft and build something for yourself. Maggie could barely speak. Thank you, Your Majesty, she said finally. Not long after that, Maggie returned to her village, but she did not return as the same girl who had left carrying a small makeup box and a big dream. She returned with opportunity, with support, and with a reputation that had already begun spreading across the kingdom. Using the grant from the king and the money she earned from the celebration, Maggie opened a beauty studio right in the center of the village. It was not very large, but it was beautiful. Inside the studio, Maggie offered many services: makeup, hairstyling, tailoring. She also did something many people did not expect. She began training young girls. Girls who wanted to learn how to work with their hands. Girls who wanted skills that could change their lives. Soon, the small studio became the busiest place in the village. Women began booking appointments days ahead. Sometimes arguments even broke out. "I booked Maggie first. No, I came before you." Some women became so desperate to secure an appointment that they secretly visited Maggie's house late in the evening. They would whisper carefully,
Maggie, do our makeup first tomorrow.
"I will pay double." They did not want anyone else to book her before them. The same women who once laughed at Maggie now spoke her name with admiration.
Maggie is the best. No one does makeup like Maggie. She is truly gifted.
Even the mothers in the village began using Maggie as an example to their daughters. Whenever young girls complained about people insulting them, their mothers would say,
Look at Maggie. People mocked her too, but she never allowed it to break her. Be confident like Maggie.
Before long, Maggie became known as the first young successful girl in the entire village. But despite all her success, Maggie never became proud or arrogant. She still laughed loudly, she still walked through the village streets greeting people kindly, and sometimes in the evenings, she would sit outside with her mother, talking about everything that had happened. Her mother would shake her head in amazement. "Look at you now," she would say. Maggie would laugh. Then she would say the same thing she had been saying since she was a young girl.
See, Mama, I told you my face card never declines.